Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and we're back, ladies and gentlemen. We're doing GBR again. Why am I doing GBR again? Well, of course, we want to get a little bit of a pulse on Odin's performance here. We've got some heavy tier 3, so it's not going to be a noob carry the way it was for Galactus, thankfully. But I also want to talk in general about GBR, because I think it's a game mode that actually is kind of being forgotten. And it's sort of the theme with a lot of game modes in Marvel Future Fight, and that's why we've had that. Yeah, I'm getting crushed. I'm actually keeping up kind of with this Jean Grey, I think. Yeah, tier 3 Jean Grey, by the way. Very cool. So what I want to talk about is GBR, because it's been almost 2 years straight. Think about this. Almost 2 years straight of Master Mold, okay? Which is crazy when you say it like that. And then you also have the fact that we're coming up on a year of Galactus. That's a long time for a game mode to not get any any new content whatsoever. And that's sort of the issue with Marvel Future Fight in general. But I think GBR is special, and I think GBR can definitely be one of, if not the top tier game mode. So we did 20 million damage in just over a minute. I think that's really good for a level 60 character. It's very impressive, which means he can carry this stage in under 5 minutes. So he can already beat Master Mold in about 4 minutes and maybe 3 minutes and change, because Master Mold only has like 60 something million HP. But I want to talk more generally about Giant Boss Raid, because I think it has a lot of potential, but like a lot of other game modes in Marvel Future Fight, I feel like it's being neglected, and that's sort of we've come to expect that here. But yeah, I mean, we still want the devs to rework Timeline Battle. We still want the devs to rework Alliance Conquest, of course, but I do think that Giant Boss Raid should not be very far behind. I think they should not wait a year. I mean, this game is already, it's crazy to say, but this game is already 5 years old. And the fact that they introduced Giant Boss Raid and they think that it's okay to only release one new boss per year blows my mind. You know, remember back in the day, I understand that it was maybe, you know, there was a larger volume of players, so there was more money. I'm not suggesting that there are fewer devs now than there were, but let me remind you guys, just 2 years ago, I'm not talking like 4 or 5 years ago, just 2 years ago with Infinity War, okay? We had the Infinity War Proxima Midnight World Boss Ultimate when we introduced to tier 3 characters, okay? Because this introduced, you know, combat books for Captain America tier 3. And then 1 month later, that's right, I said 1 month, not a year later. A month later, we got Black Dwarf. And then we got I think we got Corvus and Black Dwarf, or Corvus and Cull Obsidian at the same time. So 3 bosses in the span of, sorry, not you. 3 bosses in the span of 2 months. And then a month after that, when we had Thor tier 3 as an option, we got Ebony Maw. And then a month or 2 after that, we got Thanos. So again, in the span of, let's say, 6 months, we had 5 world bosses added. And okay, maybe, you know, okay, maybe the world bosses are not, they're a lot smaller than Giant Boss Raid, and it's single player rather than being multiplayer. So maybe that's why it takes them longer. Okay, sure. But 5 in 6 months versus 1 in a year, right? That's like 1/10 of the production level. So it's high time that they introduce another boss. And the thing is, with Giant Boss Raid, there's so many cool bosses that they can do. They could do a Knull boss with a symbiote thing. They can do a annihilus boss. They can do an Ultron boss. They can do a Beyonder boss. You know, take any high quality character. You could do a MODOK boss. There's tons. They could do an AIM, just like an AIM boss, and they create some sort of big monster. It doesn't have to actually be a character. It doesn't actually have to be, you know, a notable and recognizable name character. But there's tons. There's tons of characters that they can choose for and choose from. The game is not, you know, it's Marvel, right? There's always it's an infinitely creative property, and there's millions of comic books, so they can always choose new bosses. So that's really not an argument for why, you know, they definitely have the staff. They definitely have the staff available to make a new Giant Boss Raid, because as we showed 2 years ago, they were able to do 5 World Boss Ultimates in the span of 6 months. I think it was 5 months, but let's just say 6 months, okay? And then, you know, we know that they're not missing, so they have the staff for this. And we know that they also aren't lacking in creativity, because I'm sure the people who work for Marvel Future Fight can suggest off the top of their heads, they can suggest 2, 3, 4 different bosses. I just, off the top of my head, Mephisto, right? There's so many bosses that you could choose from to have as a final boss here. The Grandmaster, the Collector, etc., Maestro. There's so many, right? So what can they do besides just introducing a new boss? What can they do to really spice up Giant Boss Raid? And we're not going to talk about the rewards, because the rewards for Giant Boss Raid, we know they're not very good. They need to be improved. Yes, that's a pretty simple change here. But I think what they can do to Giant Boss Raid, I actually have 3 suggestions. The first 2 suggestions include sort of exclusive characters, or characters like excluding certain characters or making other characters a requirement. And then the other suggestion, the third suggestion I have for Giant Boss Raid, is to get rid of the days. I think this is a much better idea. I think you should just be allowed to spawn your own Giant Boss Raid a certain number of times per day. So, you can just go and create a lobby, right? Like this, except you get to choose which Giant Boss Raid you fight, right? Rather than being stuck on the day, why don't they just let you choose which Giant Boss Raid you want to fight, and then you spawn a lobby based on what you've chosen. So if you want to fight Master Mold, Combat Blaster Speed, you spawn that specific Giant Boss Raid. You create that specific lobby. If you want to fight Galactus, you create that specific lobby. And, because Galactus is only supposed to be available once per week, they can have a limit of once per day. So you can only spawn Galactus once per day. That makes sense, right? That's pretty normal, right? Or they can just let you spawn Galactus as much as you want, but limit the number of items. Like there's a maximum of 1 rage that can drop per day for your account, and there's a maximum of 10 Silver Surfer Bios that can drop per day for your account as well. I think the 2-week schedule for Silver Surfer is kind of old now. It's already been a year. The exclusivity of the character is gone. I mean, they're selling him in the shop for crystals, right? For crying out loud. So they should just get rid of that. So I honestly think you should just be able to choose which boss you summon and then create a lobby around that boss, because it gives the player more agency. If your account, let's say for example, right? You know how Giant Boss Raid Master Mold changes type, right? So today it's combat type, right? So let's say your account has a lot of blast types. So you're going to want to play this one because it's combat. You have the advantage, but you don't have a lot of speed types. You don't have a lot of, whatever, other type. So you don't want to fight those. So allowing players to spawn the ones that they want means they can try out different teams. They can try out different strategies. I keep hitting my mic, sorry. But they can try out all of these things, and at the same time, they can it sort of allows them to cater to their roster a little bit more, which is fun, right? It's interesting, rather than just following this boring pattern that they've set out for us. Okay, fine. But what are the better ideas that I have? Okay, so I basically have 2 better ideas for Giant Boss Raid, and they both revolve around either requirements or phases of the boss. So the first one, requirements, as soon as this decides to load, man, the servers for Marvel Future Fight are top quality, top notch. I must say, the orange circle, there we go. They finally decided to boot up the servers. Okay, they blew the dust off the servers, and they slammed her on the back there to get her going. So, this is pretty straightforward, right? You just use blast characters, whoop-de-doo. It's not really that interesting, right? So rather than just having this, and you can do this for different different giant bosses, right? So maybe Master Mold, because he's a machine type, he becomes immune to, you remember how they had those unique abilities from Shadowland? He becomes immune to the Phoenix Force, or he becomes immune to characters that have the mind damage property. So characters like Kid Omega, Emma Frost, right? Maybe not Jubilee, but you get what I'm saying. Those mind damage characters, Psylocke, etc. Or if you want to do that, if you want to keep it more simple than that, they can just separate characters and create requirements based around the different categories of characters. So, today, or for this particular boss, if they don't want to do the spawn whatever boss you want, you can only use the X-Men. You can only use mutants, right? Or maybe the X-Men specifically, or the Brotherhood of Mutants. Maybe you can only use the Sinister Six. Maybe you can only use the Warriors of the Sky. You can only use the Gamma characters of the Gamma family, for example. Perhaps you can only use aliens, right? You can only use Asgardians. So you have all the Asgardians to choose from. You can only use characters that have the leadership ability. So they can sort of just piggyback off that leadership thing and create giant boss raids where you have to follow these particular rules. So it makes it just a little bit harder because, as it stands now, Master Mold is very, very easy, right? On top of that, they can go a step further, and rather than having the requisite on the front page before you jump into the giant boss raid, the giant boss raid could have phases, and that creates a more interesting component of interactivity during the boss fight. So rather than the boss just having his phases and just doing his own thing, it would be very interesting if the game sort of forces you at the beginning when you're choosing your team, that it warns you, for example, you should bring 1 blast type, 1 combat, and 1 speed type. So you're like, okay, sure. So you build out your team here, 1 blast, or 1 combat, 1 speed, and we need a blast type. Okay, we're going to choose a blast type here. Okay, why? Well, the first phase of the fight, the boss takes reduced damage from combat and blast, so you have to use speed. And then in the second phase of the fight, or maybe the healing phase of the fight, when the boss is trying to heal, you have to use a blast type to interrupt him. And then at the end of the fight, when he has his final armor on, speed and blast don't work, and you've got to use a combat type. And you can do interesting things like that. And you can always create a situation where if this seems too overwhelming for new players, you can still do damage with other types, or you can still do damage if you're not following the requirements of the phases. You'll just do less damage. This is interesting for 2 reasons. For one, if you build up these more niche characters, you get much more of a kick out of them. So for example, if you take my requirements idea, if the requirement was to bring the Inhumans, then even though these characters have not gotten a rework, these characters are not actually better now than they were 6 months ago or whatever. These 2 characters here, we'll just ignore Jean Grey, I know she's not Inhuman, but Medusa and Black Bolt, they haven't improved these characters, they haven't reworked these characters. But by creating a giant boss raid where Inhumans do 500% more damage, Medusa and Black Bolt are going to just fly through this stage, right? They're going to do so much damage, 10, 20, 30 million damage with a pretty standard build. On the flip side, you could still clear the giant boss raid with Jean Grey or with Thanos, or you could just completely ignore the requirements and do it with Sharon Rogers or whatever, but you're going to do way less damage. So not only does that teach players about building their roster out wide, and it teaches them about all of the different clans in the Marvel universe, and it gets them interested in humans, mutants, Asgardians, etc. But it also has this sort of comedic component where if you're with noobs and they don't know, imagine all the forum posts, imagine all the thing. Guys, my tier 3 Sharon Rogers was outgunned. I only did 10 million damage, but this Medusa, this level 70 Medusa did 50 million damage. How can this be? Right? Well, you weren't paying attention to the giant boss raid requirements, and today Inhumans do more damage. So that's basically why. I think this is hilarious. I think this is an amazing idea, and I think that they can pretty easily implement this, and I just don't know why they don't do it. I understand that they want the game to be casual friendly, and they can do that by cycling through days that have no requirements, which is obviously this is basically what it is now, right? But giving the players more freedom to summon the boss that they want, whether you want to fight against Master Mold or you want to fight against Galactus and any other future bosses that they might introduce. I really hope they do introduce new bosses, but giving players the flexibility to summon their own boss, and then creating giant boss raids that are a bit more interesting in the sense that either they want you to bring certain characters of a certain type or a certain value, right? You could say like Sinister Six, sure. And you can have phases like I talked about as well, where you have to use specific types of characters. So you could have a male-female phase. So the first half of the fight, you have to do damage with male characters. And the second half of the fight, you have to do damage with female characters. Or you have to do damage with iframe skills or without iframe skills, right? That's a bit more complicated. That might be a little bit more annoying for newer players. You could have a phase where you have to deal elemental damage. So you want to build out your best team, right? Let's say you want to build out your team like this. But at first, Beta Ray Bill's not there. So you have someone else. You have a leadership or whatever. Then you're like, oh, you know what? Well, Cyclops has elemental damage. But let's say he didn't. Let's say I had a different uniform for Cyclops, right? Then suddenly you need elemental damage. So now you want to tweak the team a little bit to include elemental damage, or, based on the race of the character, right? So you want to bring in, now you have to deal damage with alien types or alien allies or whatever, human allies, so on and so forth. You have to deal damage with someone that has the command ability or the leadership ability or what have you, right? The leadership ability over here. So yeah, I really think they should take advantage of this. They do it already in Shadowland, which I think is great, right? And this is why I wanted to highlight it, because I think they need to take this idea, right? This idea and what they did with the Shadowland stages 31, 32, 33, 34. They need to take this idea and they need to put it into other game modes. They sort of already do it in World Boss, where you need energy for Cull Obsidian, you need elemental energy for Ebony, you need ignore dodge for Corvus, and you need physical for Proxima and whatever for the other mutant ones. They sort of do it, but I think they can definitely increase it. I think Giant Boss Raid already is a game mode that's not really meant for new players anyways, right? It's one of the last game modes that you unlock, and it's one of the most difficult game modes to unlock based on the story, and it's also one of the most difficult game modes to run through because the boss has so much HP, right? 70 million HP, and you can't really, it's much harder to carry it by yourself. So if you just just happen to get paired up with 2 other noobs and you're a noob, you're just not going to clear it. Even though you have 10 minutes, you're just not going to do enough damage. The boss is going to mind control you, kill you, freeze you, whatever. So I think because it's so challenging, they can pretty easily introduce these requirements or these phases, explain it to the players, do a good job of putting in some tutorials or whatever, and then they can create a much more robust experience and a much more interesting experience. You know, they should have certain giant bosses, and they can even have thematic weaknesses. So, you know, Silver Surfer does 50% more damage to Galactus, right? So you fight Galactus to unlock Silver Surfer to then go back and kill Galactus faster, right? Just kind of makes sense. So yeah, I got a lot of these ideas from 7 Deadly Sins Grand Cross because of the way that they do their deathmatch and boss system, and I think it's fantastic. But even that game could use some sprucing up because, as far as I know, even on their JP server, which is over a year old, they have yet to bring in a new permanent boss to go with the 3 that they have. So, you know, Marvel Future Fight has had 2 years and they've come up with 2 bosses, whereas that game had 1 year and they came up with 3 bosses. They're both kind of in need of some major sprucing up. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think of Odin's performance, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.